The building had his name etched in chrome letters, 20 stories high. His fortune appeared on magazine covers quarterly, but the person who raised him from nothing didn't even have their name on the medication chart in the place where he'd left them to fade. I sat in the common room on Thursday, it might have been Thursday, watching news coverage of his latest acquisition, $3 billion. The reporter called it a masterstroke of vision. I wondered if vision included remembering the person who taught you to read. Outside those walls, Callum Devane owned 17 properties across 4 continents. Inside the facility where I now resided, I owned exactly what fit in a single dresser drawer. The contrast wasn't lost on me. It was the architecture of my new reality. His offices occupied the entire top floor of the Devane Tower in the financial district of Greyshaw, a city that had rebuilt itself around tech money and venture capital. Floor-to-ceiling windows, Italian marble, art that cost more than most people's houses. The Meadowbrook care residence where I now lived had fluorescent lights that hummed constantly and linoleum floors the color of old teeth. The windows looked out onto a parking lot. The art was motivational posters about autumn leaves and new beginnings. His mornings began with a personal chef preparing single-origin coffee and custom protein blends. Mine began with a medication cart wheeled by a rotating cast of nurses who rarely remembered my name. His cars were chauffeured. Mine was a shared van to medical appointments, scheduled weeks in advance. His meetings happened in boardrooms where every word carried weight. My conversations happened in hallways that smelled like industrial cleaner and overcooked vegetables. The staff at Devane Industries called him Sir with reverence. The staff here called me Hon with absent-minded kindness that somehow felt worse than indifference. But here's what I want you to understand before this story unfolds. Before you hear about the choices that brought us both to this moment. If you've ever been discarded after giving everything, if you've ever been forgotten by someone you built from the ground up, if you've ever had to find dignity in a place where gratitude should have lived, this story is for you. And if you're listening with Mr. Douglas Tales, comment. Tell us where you are watching from. I wasn't Callum's parent. I was something stranger and more complicated. The person who made sure he became someone who could have parents to disappoint. They found him at 6 years old. That's the sanitized version. The real version is messier. A child services intervention, a mother who disappeared, a father who was never in the picture, a boy who'd been living in conditions that made caseworkers go quiet when they filed their reports. I worked for the Halloway Foundation then. We didn't call ourselves foster care, though that's functionally what we were. We specialized in high-potential youth from disadvantaged circumstances. Translation: smart kids from broken situations, given structure and education, and a chance to be more than their beginning. Callum was brilliant even then. Frighteningly so. He taught himself to read using newspapers he found in apartment building lobbies. He could do multiplication in his head, faster than most adults with calculators. But brilliance doesn't keep you warm. It doesn't make you feel safe. It doesn't teach you that the world might not be a hostile place designed to hurt you. That part, the raising, the care, the 1,000 invisible acts of building a human being, that fell to me. I wasn't the only staff member, but I was the consistent one. The one who stayed when funding got tight and other counsellors moved to better paying positions. The one who sat with him through nightmares. The one who taught him that locked doors could mean safety instead of entrapment. The years between 6 and 18 were a negotiation between his trauma and his potential. Some days, potential won. He devoured books. He asked questions that made his teachers uncomfortable because they revealed how much he was thinking beyond the curriculum. He built a computer from salvaged parts when he was 12. Other days, trauma won. He'd shut down completely, going silent for hours. He'd flinch at sudden movements. He'd hoard food in his room because scarcity had taught him abundance was a lie. I worked with both versions of him, the genius and the frightened child. They were the same person. There was no contract that said I'd dedicate 13 years to one child. No policy that required I spend my own money on birthday gifts when the foundation's budget ran thin. No rule that made me sit in hospital waiting rooms when he broke his arm during a soccer game, or attend every academic award ceremony, or help him practice interview skills for university admissions. I did those things because love doesn't wait for paperwork. People assume caregiving in institutions is mechanical, cold, professional to the point of detachment. Sometimes it is, but sometimes you meet a child who is so desperately trying to prove they deserve to exist that you can't help but meet them where they are. Callum never called me mom or dad. We weren't that, but he called me by my first name, Kit, with a particular tone that meant something deeper than familiarity. It meant, you're the one who stayed. The universities courted him aggressively. Full scholarships, special programs. He chose Langford, an elite private university known for producing CEOs and senators. It was 3 hours away. I helped him pack. We didn't talk about what it meant that he was leaving. We talked about whether he needed the heavy coat or if the lighter jacket would be sufficient, whether he had enough socks. Practical things that felt safer than emotions. The day I drove him to campus, he was 18, legally an adult, functionally, still learning how to be a person. You'll be okay, I told him in the parking lot outside his dormitory. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You taught me how. It felt like closure. It felt like the end of something that had been my entire adult life. I didn't know then that it was also the beginning of becoming irrelevant. The calls came regularly at first. Every Sunday evening, he'd tell me about classes, about the students who'd never had to work for anything, about professors who challenged him in ways that made him feel alive. Then the calls became bi-weekly, then monthly. I understood. He was building a life. That's what I'd raised him to do. He graduated summa cum laude with a double major in computer engineering and business. The foundation hosted a small celebration. He came, shook hands with the board members, gave a brief speech about opportunity and gratitude. He caught my eye during the speech and smiled. I thought it meant he remembered. After Langford came the startup. He and 2 classmates built something involving data infrastructure. I didn't fully understand the technology, but I understood ambition. They worked 100-hour weeks. They burned through seed funding. They nearly collapsed twice. Then they secured Series B funding, $50 million. Callum called me the night the deal closed. We did it, he said. His voice carried an exhaustion I recognized from his teenage years when he'd studied until dawn. I'm proud of you, I told him. I know. A pause. I couldn't have gotten here without, he trailed off. Without everything. Everything. Such a vast word for 13 years of daily, unglamorous labor. The startup became Devane Industries when Callum bought out his co-founders and rebranded. His face appeared in business magazines. The genius who built an empire from code. How Callum Devane disrupted data infrastructure. The articles mentioned his difficult upbringing in vague terms. They focused on his intelligence, his vision, his relentless work ethic. They never mentioned the Holloway Foundation. They never mentioned me. I didn't expect credit. That's not why you raise someone. But I noticed the omission. I noticed how his origin story became more palatable in retelling. Less about a traumatized child services case, more about a self-made visionary. I was 56 when my health started failing. Nothing dramatic, just the slow accumulation of wear. Joint pain that made standing for long shifts difficult. Fatigue that didn't respond to rest. My doctor used words like chronic and management and quality of life considerations. The foundation had decent health insurance, but decent doesn't mean comprehensive. And my salary had never been about wealth accumulation. It had been about showing up for children who needed someone to stay. I mentioned it to Callum during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "You should see a specialist," he said immediately. "I'll cover it." He did. The best rheumatologist in Greyshaw. She confirmed what I'd suspected. I could keep working, but probably not for much longer. And living alone was becoming impractical. I started researching options. Assisted living facilities. Senior apartments with support services. The costs were staggering. Callum called me on a Wednesday afternoon. I remember because Wednesdays were my therapy day. I'd started seeing someone to process the strange grief of a body giving up on you. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said, without preamble. "I found a solution." Hope did a stupid thing in my chest. Maybe he'd offer his guest house. Maybe he'd hire a home health aide. Maybe he'd... There's a care residence called Meadowbrook. Top-rated facility, private rooms, full medical staff. I've already made arrangements. The hope collapsed into something colder. "Arrangements," I repeated. "You'll be taken care of, Kit. Everything you need. I've set up a fund to cover all expenses indefinitely." It was generous. It was thoughtful. It was a billionaire's version of gratitude. It was also a decision he'd made without asking me what I wanted. "When were you planning to tell me?" I asked quietly. A pause. "I'm telling you now. The room is available in 2 weeks. I'll have movers help you pack." I didn't fight it. What was the alternative? Drain my savings, staying in an apartment I could barely maintain? Become a burden on former colleagues who had their own struggles? Callum was offering a solution. A comfortable one, by most measures. So why did it feel like exile? The movers came on a Saturday. Efficient, professional young people who wrapped my life into boxes with practice speed. Callum didn't come. He sent his assistant, a woman named Petra, with a clipboard and a kind smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Devane wanted to be here," she said, which was clearly a lie. "But he's in Singapore closing an acquisition." Singapore, the other side of the world. More important than the person who taught him the world was safe enough to explore. Meadowbrook wasn't terrible. That's the thing that made it worse. If it had been neglectful or cruel, I could have been righteously angry. Instead, it was adequately comfortable. Clean, organized, staffed by people who were professionally kind. It was a place where people went to be maintained until they weren't. My room was private, as promised. Window overlooking the parking lot. Bathroom with safety rails. A bed, a dresser, a chair, a television I rarely turned on. The first night, I lay awake listening to sounds I didn't recognize. Someone coughing down the hall, the medication cart's squeaky wheel, a television playing a game show through thin walls. I thought about Callum in whatever hotel he was staying in. 5-star, probably a suite, probably views of a skyline he was about to own a piece of. I wondered if he thought about me at all. The visits came in a predictable pattern at first, once a month, scheduled through Petra. 30-minute windows between meetings. He'd arrive in whatever he was wearing to the office that day. Expensive clothes that made him look like someone I'd helped create but no longer knew. He'd ask about my health, my comfort level, whether the staff was treating me well. I'd say yes to everything, because what else was there to say? The conversations were pleasant, surface level. He'd tell me about expansions and acquisitions in language, so sanitized of actual human experience that I sometimes wondered if he remembered what it felt like to be uncertain about anything. Then, the visits became every 6 weeks, then quarterly. Each time he looked more like a stranger. Not physically, he still had the same sharp features, the same dark eyes that had once looked at me like I held all the answers. But something had calcified. Success had built us walls that didn't have doors for inconvenient emotions. I watched his empire grow from television news and business magazines in the Meadowbrook common room. Devane Industries went public. The IPO was the largest tech offering in 5 years. Callum's personal wealth hit $11 billion overnight. The news anchor interviewed him. "What drives you?" she asked. "The work," he said. "Building something that matters, creating value." Not the child who was taught that value isn't conditional. Not the person who showed me I deserve to exist. Just the work. The other residents at Meadowbrook weren't unkind. We shared a particular species of abandonment. Children who visited less and less. Grandchildren who sent cards on birthdays. Families who'd made the rational decision that professional care was more practical than personal presence. I met Lucinda in the dining hall. She'd been a concert pianist before arthritis made playing impossible. Her daughter lived in Greyshaw, 20 minutes away, but visited maybe 3 times a year. "They get busy," Lucinda said without bitterness. "Life happens." "Does it get easier?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "You learn to want less. That's not the same as easier." 6 months into my residency at Meadowbrook, Devane Industries made headlines for acquiring a competitor in a hostile takeover. The business press praised Callum's ruthless efficiency. I wondered when efficiency had replaced empathy in his decision-making calculus. His assistant Petra called more than he did. She'd check on arrangements, make sure the facility had everything I needed, process payment authorizations with cheerful professionalism. "Mr. Devane wanted me to let you know he's thinking of you," she'd say. I wanted to ask, if he's thinking of me, why doesn't he call himself? I never did. It felt undignified to demand attention from someone who'd clearly moved beyond needing to give it. The first crack appeared in a profile piece in Frontier Business magazine, a 10,000-word investigation into Callum's rise. Most of it was familiar territory: genius founder, visionary CEO, disruptor of industries. But buried in paragraph 47 was a single line that made my hands shake. Devane has been notably private about his early life, with conflicting accounts about his family background and the institutions that shaped his formative years. Conflicting accounts. He was rewriting history. making it cleaner, more acceptable for the kind of legacy he wanted to build. I wasn't the only one who noticed. A journalist named Ruth Okafor reached out to the Holloway Foundation, doing research for a book about social mobility and institutional care. She called me. The facility's front desk transferred her through after she explained she was doing background research on notable alumni. I understand you worked with Callum Devane during his time at Holloway, she said. I did. My voice sounded strange to me. No one had asked about that chapter in years. He's been difficult to reach for comment. His PR team is very protective. I'm trying to understand what kind of support system made his success possible. The question hung there. What kind of support system? Not who helped him. Not who stayed when leaving would have been easier. Just what kind of system? It's complicated, I finally said. The best stories are. Her voice was kind. Would you be willing to talk? On the record? I told her I'd think about it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about On the Record, about what it would mean to tell the true version of Callum's origin, about whether I even had the right. I'd never wanted credit, but I'd also never expected to be erased. The second crack came during a quarterly earnings call that Lucinda and I watched together in the common room. She'd developed an interest in watching rich people pretend numbers mean something. An analyst asked about Devane Industries' corporate social responsibility initiatives. Callum's response was smooth. We believe in giving back to the communities that support us. Our foundation focuses on education equity and technological access for underserved youth. Does that include institutions like Holloway Foundation, where you received support? The analyst pressed. A pause. Barely noticeable, unless you were listening for it. Our giving strategy is focused on scalable impact, Callum said. We partner with organizations that have proven metrics for outcome measurement. Translation. No. Lucinda looked at me. That's the place you worked at, isn't it? I nodded. He's not supporting them. Apparently, not scalable enough. She snorted. Scalable? What a word for I don't want to remember. The invitation came through Petra. Devane Industries was hosting a gala to celebrate 10 years since founding, a fundraiser for the corporate foundation, black tie, guest list of 800. Mr. Devane would be honoured if you'd attend, Petra said over the phone. Honoured felt like the wrong word. Obligated, maybe, conscious that optics required some gesture toward gratitude. I don't have anything to wear to something like that, I said honestly. A stylist will reach out, Petra replied smoothly. Car service will pick you up at 6. Mr. Devane is very much looking forward to seeing you. The stylist arrived at Meadowbrook with options. A nurse had to help me dress. My hands couldn't manage the buttons anymore. The car was a town car with a driver who made professional small talk about traffic and weather. It felt like being transported to a different planet. The gala was at the Greyshaw Museum of Contemporary Art. The building itself was a statement, glass and steel cantilevered over a reflecting pool. I was helped out of the car by an attendant in white gloves. Inside, the museum had been transformed into something out of a magazine. Ice sculptures, champagne fountains, string quartet playing something elegant and forgettable. People in clothes, worth more than my annual foundation salary, mingled with the ease of those who belonged. I felt like an artifact they'd wheeled out for authenticity. Callum found me near the sculpture gallery. He looked like he'd been designed for this environment. Perfect tuxedo, perfect hair, perfect smile that he turned on me like a spotlight. Kit, you came. He took both my hands, which was more physical contact than we'd had in a year. You invited me? I did. He seemed about to say something more, then someone called his name. I have to. There are people I need to. We'll talk later, okay? Later didn't come. I watched him work the room. He was magnetic, charming. He knew exactly how long to spend with each cluster of guests to make them feel valued without dominating their time. This was a skill I hadn't taught him. This was something else. Something he'd learned in a world I'd never been part of. The speeches began after dinner. The foundation director talked about impact. A board member discussed strategic vision. Then Callum took the podium. 10 years ago, he began, I was standing in a tiny apartment with two friends, convinced we were about to change everything. We were arrogant and sleep-deprived and probably wrong about most of our assumptions. Laughter from the audience. But we were right about one thing. Technology could be a bridge between information and access, between potential and opportunity. He continued, weaving a narrative about innovation and risk and the importance of betting on ideas that seemed impossible. He talked about mentors, professors at Langford who challenged him, early investors who believed in unproven concepts, employees who took risks on an uncertain startup. He never mentioned Holloway. He never mentioned the 13 years before Langford existed. He never mentioned me. I left before the gala ended. The driver seemed surprised I wanted to go early, but didn't argue. Back at Meadowbrook, I sat in my room in a designer dress I'd never wear again and tried to understand what I was feeling. Not anger, exactly. Something quieter and more corrosive. Grief, maybe. For a relationship I'd thought meant more than a line item in his charitable giving budget. The call came from the Holloway Foundation director, Janet Merrick. We'd kept in touch over the years, though less frequently since I'd moved to Meadowbrook. Kit, I need to tell you something. Her voice was tight. We're closing. The words didn't make sense at first. What do you mean, closing? Funding dried up. Our largest donors pulled out. We've been operating on fumes for 2 years, but we can't sustain it anymore. The board voted yesterday. We're shutting down at the end of the fiscal year. 43 years of work. Hundreds of children given chances they wouldn't have had otherwise. Gone. I'm so sorry, Janet continued. I know this place meant everything to you. Did you reach out to Callum? The question came out before I could stop it. Silence. Then, we did. 18 months ago, his foundation team sent a very polite rejection, said our operational model didn't align with their investment thesis. Investment thesis. Children reduced to return on investment calculations. Kit, there's something else. Janet's voice dropped. We found something in the old files when we were packing up the archives. She came to visit me at Meadowbrook 3 days later, carrying a cardboard file box. Inside were documents from Callum's intake, case files, assessment reports, court paperwork, and letters. Dozens of letters. Letters I'd written to potential sponsors when Callum needed medical care the foundation couldn't cover. Letters to universities requesting fee waivers for application costs. Letters to summer programs, to scholarship committees, to anyone who might give a brilliant, damaged child another chance. Letters I'd written on my own time, in my own words, making the case for why Callum Devane deserved investment. At the bottom of the box was something else, A document I didn't recognize. A financial agreement. I read it twice before understanding. When Callum turned 18 and aged out of Holloway's care, I'd signed something. A waiver releasing the foundation from any future financial obligation. Standard procedure. But there was a second signature. Callum's. On a separate document dated the same day. A promissory note. A personal commitment to support the foundation once he was financially able. Not legally binding, just a moral agreement, a recognition of debt. It was notarized, witnessed, and apparently completely forgotten. "Did you know about this?" Janet asked gently. I shook my head. I knew he signed something. I thought it was just acknowledgement paperwork. I didn't know he'd promised $1 million over 10 years in incremental gifts tied to his financial success. Janet's voice was flat. He never paid a cent. The numbers blurred. I set the document down before I crumpled it. When he started making real money, we reached out, Janet continued. Gently, at first. His assistant said he didn't recall the commitment. Then his lawyer said it wasn't legally enforceable. Then they stopped responding entirely. He forgot. The words tasted like ash. Or he decided remembering was inconvenient. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called Callum directly. It went to voicemail. His voice smooth and professional. "You've reached Callum Devane. Please leave a message." "It's Kit," I said. "We need to talk about Holloway and about what you promised." He didn't call back. Petra called instead. 2 days later, professional sympathy in her voice like a learned script. "Mr. Devane received your message. He's concerned you might be experiencing some confusion. Memory issues can be common with—" "I'm not confused," I cut her off. "I have documentation." A pause. "What kind of documentation?" "The promissory note he signed. His commitment to Holloway." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll need to consult with our legal team. But Kit, I want you to know, Mr. Devane cares about you very much. He's asked me to arrange for a comprehensive health evaluation. Sometimes stress can cause—" "I don't need a health evaluation. I need him to call me back." "Of course. I'll make sure he knows this is important to you." The call ended. He never called. Instead, 3 days later, I received a visit from someone I'd never met. Dr. Raymond Cross, according to his business card, a geriatric psychiatrist. "I'm here at Mr. Devane's request," he said, settling into the chair across from my bed. "He's concerned about your well-being." "My well-being is fine." "He mentioned you've been making unusual claims about financial agreements and promises." His smile was kind in a way that felt like a trap. Sometimes, as we age, memories can become confused. We might remember things that didn't happen or conflate different events. "I have documents," I said again. Documents can be misinterpreted, especially complex financial or legal materials. What I'd like to do is run a few cognitive assessments, just to establish a baseline, to make sure you're getting appropriate care. Understanding hit like ice water. This wasn't about my health. This was about credibility. If a psychiatrist documented cognitive decline, anything I said about Callum's broken promises would be dismissed as the confused ramblings of someone who couldn't be trusted. "Get out," I said quietly. Dr. Cross's smile didn't waver. "I understand this is difficult. Change can be frightening, but Mr. Devane only wants what's best for you. Get out of my room." He left, but the visit went in my file. I knew because a nurse mentioned it the next day, casually, like it was routine. Dr. Cross recommended we monitor you for agitation, she said, while taking my blood pressure. Nothing to worry about, just keeping you safe. Safe. Another word for controlled. I called Janet Merrick. I need copies of everything. Every letter, every document, every piece of evidence that I worked with Callum, that I was part of his story. What are you planning? She asked. I don't know yet, but he doesn't get to erase me. The lawyer came next. Not Dr. Cross, an actual attorney, a woman named Fiona Hargrove from Callum's corporate legal team. She was younger than me by decades, wearing a suit that probably cost what I used to make in a month. She sat down with a leather portfolio and a practiced expression of concern. Ms. Kitt, I understand there's been some confusion about historical agreements involving Mr. Devane and the Holloway Foundation. No confusion, I said. Clarity, actually. I've reviewed the documents in question. The promissory note you referenced was indeed signed, but you may not be aware of the circumstances. Callum was 18, still effectively under institutional care. There's a strong argument that he wasn't in a position to make binding financial commitments. It wasn't legally binding, I said. It was a moral commitment. Morality is subjective. She pulled out her own documents. What's not subjective is Mr. Devane's extraordinary generosity toward you. He's covered all your care costs. He's ensured you have a comfortable residence. He's been more than generous. He put me in a facility and stopped visiting. He provided appropriate care for your declining health. That's not abandonment. That's responsibility. The words were so carefully chosen, so perfectly positioned to make my grievance sound unreasonable. Holloway is closing because he broke his promise, I said. Holloway is closing because it failed to maintain sustainable funding. That's not Mr. Devane's responsibility. He's under no obligation to support an organization that didn't adapt to changing philanthropic landscapes. She stood, smoothing her skirt. I'm going to be very clear, Ms. Kitt. If you pursue this publicly, if you make claims that could damage Mr. Devane's reputation, we will have to protect our client. That could mean demonstrating that your claims stem from cognitive decline. It could mean evaluating whether your current care arrangement is adequate or whether more intensive supervision is needed. The threat was delicate but unmistakable. Shut up, or we'll make you disappear more completely. I understand you're frustrated, Fiona continued, her voice softening. But ask yourself, what do you gain by fighting this? You're comfortable. You're cared for. Why risk that? She left her business card, just in case I wanted to discuss this more reasonably. Chapter 8. The Lowest Point. I stopped eating for 3 days. Not intentionally. I just couldn't make myself care about food when nothing tasted like anything. The nurses noticed. They always noticed physical things. They brought protein shakes, tried to coax me into the dining hall, documented my intake with clinical concern. Lucinda sat with me on the 4th day. You're scaring people, she said. Good. That's not good. That's giving them ammunition to say you're not thinking clearly. She was right. I knew she was right. He's going to win, I said. He has lawyers and money and a story that's already been accepted. I have old papers and memories no one wants to hear. So that's it? You just give up? What else is there? Lucinda stood up, joints cracking. There's deciding he doesn't get to write the ending. I started eating again. Mechanically at first, then with more purpose. I read through every document Janet had given me. I made notes. I tried to find patterns, connections, anything that could matter to someone who didn't already know the full story. And I thought about Ruth Okafor, the journalist who'd wanted to talk about institutional support systems. I called the number she'd left months ago, expecting voicemail. She answered on the second ring. Ruth Okafor. This is Kit from Halloway Foundation. You called about Callum Devane. I remember. Are you ready to talk? I am, but I need to know something first. If I tell you what really happened, all of it, will you print it even if his lawyers tried to kill the story? A pause. I work for independent media. We don't kill stories because rich people get uncomfortable. But I need it to be true. I need documentation. I have documentation, I said, and I have 13 years of truth. Ruth came to Meadowbrook on a Saturday. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s. With grey-streaked hair she wore in locks and eyes that catalogued everything. We sat in the facility's small library, a room with donated books and furniture that didn't quite match. I told her everything. Not the sanitized version, not the version where Callum was a tragic genius who pulled himself up. The real version, the child who couldn't sleep without a light on until he was 14. The teenager who broke down crying when he got into Langford because he didn't believe good things were allowed to happen to him. The young man who'd promised to remember where he came from. I showed her the letters I'd written, the financial records of hours I'd logged far beyond my required shifts. The promissory note. Ruth took notes, asked questions, recorded everything with my permission. This is going to make waves, she said finally. You understand that? Once this is published, there's no walking it back. I know. His team will come after you. They'll try to discredit you. They're already trying. She closed her notebook. Okay, give me 6 weeks. I need to verify everything, reach out to other sources, get comment from Devane's camp. He won't comment. Probably not. But I have to try. The weeks that followed were strange. I felt lighter somehow, like I'd set down something I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was heavy. I also felt terrified. Ruth called periodically with updates. She'd tracked down other Halloway alumni. She'd found foundation board members willing to talk on background. She'd sent detailed requests for comment to Devane Industries' PR team. The responses were predictably evasive. Mr. Devane treasures his privacy regarding his early life and doesn't comment on personal matters. Then, the pressure started. Meadowbrook's administrator, a soft-spoken man named Phil, called me to his office. Kit, I need to ask you about some calls we've been receiving. What kind of calls? From Devane Industries. They're asking about your care plan, your mental status, whether we've noticed any changes in your behavior or cognition. My stomach dropped. What did you tell them? The truth, that you're one of our most mentally sharp residents, that there are no concerns about your decision-making capacity. He leaned forward. What's going on? I told him. Not everything, but enough. He was quiet for a long moment. They're trying to build a case that you're not competent. I know. For what it's worth, I won't cooperate with that. Your medical records are your medical records. They can't access them without your permission. Thank you. But Kit, be careful. People with that kind of money don't like being challenged. If you're still listening, if you've ever been told your truth doesn't matter because someone more powerful said otherwise, if you've ever had to choose between silence and risk, I want you to know you're not alone in that impossible choice. Subscribe to Mr. Douglas for more stories where the powerless find their power. The story broke on a Wednesday morning. Ruth's publication, The Institutional Eye, ran it as a cover feature. The headline, The Billionaire's Forgotten Debt, How Callum Devane Erased the Woman Who Raised Him. My phone, the basic cell phone the facility provided, rang almost immediately. Ruth's voice was electric. It's everywhere. Every major outlet is picking it up. Business sites, tech blogs, even mainstream news. I didn't know what to say. Kit, you should prepare. This is going to get intense. She was right. By noon, there were news vans in Meadowbrook's parking lot. The administrator had to put the facility on lockdown. No unauthorized visitors, no media past the front desk. My phone kept ringing. Numbers I didn't recognize. I stopped answering. The story had everything media loves. Wealth, hypocrisy, abandoned promises. Ruth had written it carefully, backing every claim with documentation. The promissory note, my letters, testimony from other Holloway staff and alumni. She'd also included something I hadn't expected, a financial analysis of what Callum's promised support would have meant. $1 million over 10 years would have kept Holloway open, would have helped hundreds of other children. The math made his betrayal concrete. Social media exploded. I didn't have accounts. Lucinda showed me on her tablet. Hashtags. Devane, debt. Forgotten, caregivers. Billionaire betrayal. Thousands of people sharing the story, commenting, angry on my behalf. Some defended Callum. He doesn't owe anyone anything. He provided care. What more do you want? This is just someone bitter about his success. But more were outraged. This is disgusting. Imagine forgetting the person who saved you. Every billionaire is one moral bankruptcy away from this. It should have felt validating. Instead, it felt exposing. Like I'd turned my life inside out for strangers to examine. Devane Industries released a statement at 4 p.m. Mr. Devane treasures the support he received during his formative years and has always been committed to giving back to the community. He has provided comprehensive care for Ms. Kit and deeply respects her contributions. The characterization in recent media reports is incomplete and unfairly represents a complex personal history. Treasures, respects, incomplete. Words that said everything while meaning nothing. That night, my phone rang from a number I recognized, Callum's personal cell. I almost didn't answer. Kit. His voice was strained. We need to talk. Do we? This story, it's not accurate. It's not fair. What part isn't accurate? The part where you promised to support Holloway? The part where you didn't? The part where you stopped visiting? I've been supporting you. You have everything you need. I don't need things, Callum. I needed you to remember that I existed. Silence. Then, this is going to destroy everything I've built. The words hung there. Everything I've built. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I should have done better, just, my empire is at risk. Maybe it should be destroyed, I said quietly, if it's built on forgetting where you came from. That's not fair. You put me in a facility and forgot me. You let the place that saved your life close. You rewrote your own history to make it more palatable. Tell me what part of that is fair. I was trying to move forward, to not be defined by... He stopped. By what? By trauma? By poverty? By me? By all of it. His voice was raw. I wanted to be someone who wasn't, who didn't have to. Who didn't have to be grateful, I finished. The silence stretched. I'm sorry, he said finally. I'm sorry I wasn't, and that I couldn't be. It's too late for sorry, Callum. Sorry doesn't open Holloway. Sorry doesn't give me back the years you were too busy to visit. What do you want from me? The question was so telling, as if debt could be settled with a transaction. I want you to tell the truth, I said. Publicly. All of it. That would, my board would, investors would, I know, it would cost you something. That's the point. I hung up. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Devane Industries stock dropped 12% in 2 days. Board members called emergency meetings. Investors demanded answers. Major clients started reviewing their contracts. We can't be associated with someone who abandons their caregivers. The corporate foundation, the one Callum had built to showcase his philanthropy, came under scrutiny. Journalists started asking why it didn't support institutions like Holloway, why its giving went to established, prestigious organizations instead of the kind of scrappy, unglamorous programs that had saved Callum himself. Employees leaked internal emails, conversations about managing the narrative, discussions about whether to discredit me more aggressively. The public sentiment was turning against him. Ruth called with updates. 3 board members have resigned. 2 major investors are publicly distancing themselves. There's talk of a shareholder lawsuit. Because of me? The weight of it was staggering. Because he built his brand on being a self-made visionary with integrity. This shattered that image. You didn't do this, Kit. He did. Years ago, when he chose to forget. The unexpected ally came from inside Devane Industries itself. Her name was Naomi Park. She'd been Chief Operating Officer for 6 years. I'd never met her, never heard her name before she called me directly. Ms. Kit, this is Naomi Park from Devane Industries. I need 5 minutes of your time. I almost hung up, assuming it was another legal threat. I'm not calling on behalf of the company, she said quickly. I'm calling because I read the story, and because I've been watching Callum build this empire while ignoring every moral foundation that should have mattered. Why are you telling me this? Because I have grandparents in a facility like yours. Because I know what it's like to watch people get disappeared by the very families they sacrifice for, and because I have access to things that might help you. We met in person 3 days later. She came to Meadowbrook, dressed casually, no corporate armor. She brought documents, internal communications, board meeting minutes, financial records. This is everything showing Callum's deliberate decision to cut ties with Holloway, the discussions about his brand narrative, the PR strategy to minimize his institutional background, the calculation that supporting places like Holloway didn't fit his image. I stared at the papers. Why are you giving me this? Because I'm complicit. I've been part of building something that looks impressive from the outside but is morally hollow. I can't fix that, but I can make sure the truth is fully documented. You'll lose your job. Probably. She smiled grimly. But I'll be able to live with myself. Ruth's follow-up story was devastating. With Naomi's documents, she could show not just that Callum forgot his promises, but that he'd actively chosen to forget. That he'd strategically erased his connection to institutional care because it complicated his self-made narrative. The headline, Devane's deliberate erasure, internal documents show calculated betrayal. The pressure on Callum became unbearable. Advertisers pulled campaigns. Partners postponed deals. His carefully constructed image collapsed like a building with no foundation. The board gave him an ultimatum. Fix this or step down. He came to Meadowbrook on a Friday afternoon. No assistant, no lawyer, just him, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Phil, the administrator, called my room. "You have a visitor. Do you want to see him?" I thought about saying no, about making him feel what it was like to be refused. "Yes," I said, "but in the common room, with other people present." He sat across from me in a chair that was too small for his expensive suit. Several other residents were in the room, pretending not to eavesdrop. Kit. He looked older, or maybe just less invincible. "Callum, I need to tell you something, and I need to say it without lawyers, or PR teams, or any of the machinery I've built around myself." I waited. "I was ashamed," he said quietly, "of where I came from, of what I was, and instead of dealing with that shame, I buried it. I convinced myself that moving forward meant leaving everything behind, including you. You didn't just leave me behind. You rewrote the story so I was never there." "I know." He looked at his hands. "When I signed that promissory note, I meant it. I was 18 and terrified and grateful for everything you'd done. But then I got to Langford, and everyone there had normal families, normal backgrounds, and I was the charity case, the kid from nowhere." "So you became someone from nowhere by choice?" "Yes, and every year it got easier to pretend, to let the story become simpler, to become someone who didn't owe anyone anything. You owed Holloway. You owed the kids who came after you." "I did. I do." He looked up. "I can't undo what I've done. I can't give you back the years, but I can try to make it right." Callum called a press conference. Not a carefully managed corporate statement, an actual, unscripted appearance. I watched it from Meadowbrook, surrounded by residents who'd become invested in this strange drama. He stood at a podium, looking directly into cameras. "My name is Callum Devane. I'm the CEO of Devane Industries, and I need to tell you the truth about how I got here." He told the whole story, the childhood trauma, the intervention, Holloway Foundation, and me. Kit was the person who'd stayed when leaving would have been easier, who worked shifts they weren't paid for, who wrote letters on my behalf and believed I could be more than my circumstances. They raised me in every way that matters. He talked about the promissory note, the broken promise, the deliberate erasure. I told myself I was moving forward, but I was just running away from gratitude, from debt, from the uncomfortable truth that I didn't build this empire alone. I built it on a foundation someone else laid. His voice broke. "I abandoned the person who saved me. I let the institution that gave me a chance close its doors. I rewrote my history to make myself more palatable. And in doing so, I became exactly the kind of person I used to despise. Someone who takes without acknowledging what they've been given." He announced immediate actions. A $50 million fund to reopen Holloway Foundation. Personal apology visits to every former staff member. A complete restructuring of his corporate foundation to support unglamorous, essential institutions. And one more thing. I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations at Devane Industries. Not because the board forced me, because I need to learn how to be a person who remembers where they came from, who honors debts that can't be repaid, who understands that wealth without gratitude is just accumulation. The media went wild. Some called it genuine. Others called it damage control. The truth, probably, was both. But something had shifted. The story was no longer about abandonment. It was about whether redemption was possible. He came to visit me the next day. Not for 30 minutes between meetings. He cleared his entire schedule. We sat in the garden area behind Meadowbrook. It was autumn, leaves falling into geometric patterns. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. "I don't know if I can." "You can't," I said honestly. "You can't give me back the time. You can't erase the hurt. You can't make Holloway's closure not have happened." "Then what do I do?" "You remember, you actually remember, not as a PR strategy or a reputation management tool. You remember that you were a child who needed help, and people gave it, and you spend the rest of your life making sure other children get the same chance." The $50 million reopened Holloway. Janet Merrick came out of retirement to oversee it. They asked me to join the advisory board. I declined. I'd given enough years to that work, but I visited sometimes, saw the new facilities, met children who reminded me why any of it had mattered. Callum didn't move me out of Meadowbrook. I didn't ask him to, but his visits became regular, real. We talked about things that mattered, not just comfortable pleasantries. He asked about my health, actually listened to the answer, brought me books I'd mentioned wanting to read, sat with me when I was having bad pain days and didn't need me to perform gratitude. One day, he asked, "Do you forgive me?" I thought about it. "I don't know yet. Maybe forgiveness isn't the point." "What is the point?" "That you're here, that you're trying, that you're not running anymore." Naomi Park became CEO of Devane Industries. Callum stayed on as chairman, but stepped back from operations. He focused instead on the foundation, on rebuilding relationships with institutions he'd neglected, on being visible about the unglamorous origins he'd tried to hide. His story changed, not in business magazines this time, in the actual substance of how he spent his time and attention. Lucinda died in her sleep 6 months after the press conference. Peaceful, the nurses said. I sat with her body for a while before they took her away. "You were right," I told her. "He doesn't get to write the ending." I'm writing this from Meadowbrook. I'm still here. My health hasn't improved. That's not how chronic conditions work. But I'm not waiting to be remembered anymore. I've learned something. Justice isn't always revenge. Sometimes it's just truth. Truth that costs something. Truth that makes powerful people uncomfortable. Truth that refuses to be erased. Callum will always be a billionaire. I'll always be someone who lives in a care facility. That imbalance won't change. But he knows now what he owes. And I know I'm not defined by being forgotten. The other day, a new resident arrived at Meadowbrook. Younger than most, early 60s, recently disabled, clearly angry about being here. I introduced myself. We talked. I listened. "You were someone before this," I said. "You still are." They looked at me like I'd said something revolutionary. Maybe I had. If you've stayed with this story, if you've felt the weight of being discarded or forgotten, if you've had to fight for your own truth against people with more power, I see you. You're not alone in that fight. And if you enjoyed this journey, subscribe for more stories from Mr. Douglas, where every fall becomes a rise. 5 years later, Holloway Foundation is thriving. It's helped 342 children. Some of them will probably be brilliant. Some of them will probably struggle. All of them deserve the chance to find out. Callum visits me twice a month. Sometimes we talk about the past. Mostly, we talk about the present. He's learning to be a person who exists in relation to others, not above them. I'm 71 now. My hands shake most days. My memory isn't what it was, but I remember what matters. I remember the child who needed someone to stay. I remember the years I gave. I remember the moment I decided I wouldn't be erased. And I remember that debt, real debt, moral debt, doesn't disappear just because someone wants to forget. It waits, quiet and patient, until truth finds its voice.